Our plenary topic today is criminal justice. Criminal justice and LGBTQ lives in the South, which is a really big topic for 90 minutes with the 300 or 400 people that we have in the room. So we know from the start, we are not going to say everything that needs to be said. We're not going to hear every voice that needs to be heard, but we'll do our best. And I want to ask for your help, actually. I want to ask for your help in inviting every voice into this conversation. Because if you think about our Southern LGBTQ communities, we have got activists, and we've got attorneys. And we've got attorneys who are activists. We have law enforcement officials, and we have people who have been targeted and profiled by law enforcement. We have people who have been victims of crimes, and we have people who have experienced discrimination and violence while in criminal justice facilities. So we need to make our hearts and our minds and our conversation big enough to hold all of those different stories. Can we do that? I would also like to recognize, thank you Apua for honoring the ancestors. I feel like we also need to name the fact that some of the people we most need in this conversation about criminal justice are not here with us today because they're wrapped up in the criminal justice system. Maybe they are incarcerated. Maybe they are on duty. Maybe they're in court. Maybe they're in detention. Maybe they've been deported. Maybe they've been the victims of violence and are no longer with us. I'm seeing some heads nod yes. Let's bring them into the room. Can we do that? If you could close your eyes, picture their face. And when I say now, I would like you to name them. Just say their first name all together, all at once. Let's just say their first name and bring them into the room. So if you would think of somebody who should be here and would be here but they can't, if you would speak their first name now. Eddie. Maria. Let's keep them in our hearts as we go through our conversation. So we've got a great panel here. And all three of these panelists were very clear to say, don't introduce us as the experts, because there's lots of wisdom and experience in the room. But we have three really good folks that come from different perspectives on criminal justice issues. The way that we're going to do this is I'm going to start with 3 questions that each of the 3 panelists will answer. Then we will have some time, hopefully about half an hour, for questions and comments from the floor. Ready to get started? So let me introduce our panel. Immediate to my left is Nayely Perez-Huerta. Nayely has been a regional organizer with the Southeastern Immigrant Rights Network since 2012. Nayely's own experience as a 16-year-old immigrant in North Carolina, witnessing a hostile battle for in-state tuition for undocumented students, prompted her to get engaged in organizing. After serving as Advocacy Initiative intern at El Pueblo, Nayely was hired as a community organizer in 2009. She is a board member of Student Action with Farm Workers. And as part of our commitment to language justice, Nayely will offer some of her comments in Spanish. And I'd like to thank Rocio and Leo, who are going to be doing consecutive interpretation of those remarks. Sheena Johnson is the co-director of BreakOUT. Born and raised in Louisiana, Sheena brings over 7 years of organizing and advocacy experience, as well as her extensive work in the community focusing on issues facing LGBTQ youth in the juvenile justice system. At the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana and the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, Sheena investigated conditions of confinement for incarcerated youth and supported defense attorneys with zealous advocacy and investigation for court-involved youth. In 2013, Shaena became a Brown Boy after completing the Brown Boy Leadership Training Cohort. Urvashi Vaid is an attorney and organizer whose work in academic, philanthropic, advocacy, legal, and grassroots organizations spans LGBT and social justice movements. She is president of the Vaid Group LLC, a strategy consulting firm that advises socially engaged innovators on global and domestic projects to advance equity, justice, and inclusion. Urvashi is a national board member of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund and is a founder and board member of LPAC, the first lesbian political action committee. So let's give a warm welcome to our panel. Thank you all for joining us here today. So first question, what is one thing that you want folks to know as we start this conversation? Shaena, would you start us off?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? A couple of things I want folks to know before we actually begin the conversation is, in Louisiana, I think most people know about our little incarceration issue. So Louisiana has one of the highest incarceration rates per capita. So when it comes to LGBTQ youth, services are, well, when it comes to all youth, really services are compromised due to extensive caseloads and funding. If folks have been paying attention to what's going on recently in Louisiana, our former governor decided that he wanted to cut our budget. And it has been depleted so much so that now people are going to court without representation. Another thing that I want folks to know before going into this conversation is that queer and trans youth or LGBTQ youth are not receiving optimal representation. Some of it's due in part by the caseload of public defenders in juvenile court or in the juvenile sector. And another piece is the lack of cultural competency in representing queer and trans youth. What we do know and what we can see in statistics don't have to show us that there is a disproportionate number of youth of color that are affected by the juvenile criminal justice system in Louisiana. There's a lack of alternative to detention and incarceration across the board, but especially for queer and trans youth, because those alternatives are not competent or culturally competent to serve our youth, which further puts them into the belly of the beast of the juvenile criminal justice system.
Great, thank you, Sheena. Nayely?
Bueno, dicen que la revolución no va a ser en inglés, así que gracias por esta oportunidad.
It is said that the revolution will not be in English, so thank you for this opportunity.
Nuestra comunidad está siendo criminalizada por haber nacido en otra tierra.
Our community is being criminalized for having been born in a different land,
Por buscar refugio, por huir de la violencia, por querer vivir dignamente.
for looking for refuge, for running away from violence, and for having a desire to live in dignity.
Muchas veces por su identidad de género, por el color de su piel o por su etnia.
Many times, it's because of their gender identity, their skin color, or their ethnicity.
Nuestra comunidad está siendo criminalizada por tratados de libre comercio y políticas internacionales que nos desplazan de nuestra tierra.
Our community is being criminalized because of free trade agreements and because of politics that make us run away from our lands.
Estamos en tiempos de elecciones y para la comunidad inmigrante esto quiere decir que tenemos que levantar la guardia.
This is a time for elections, and for our community, this means that we have to raise our guard.
Porque nuestra comunidad está bajo ataque y nuestras familias se están convirtiendo en un juego político.
Because our community is under attack, and our families are being turned into a political game.
La comunidad inmigrante está siendo acechada por la migra.
The immigrant community is being threatened by Immigrant.
Las redadas que están sucediendo están aterrorizando a nuestras comunidades.
The ambushes that are being put down by ICE are threatening our community.
Yeah, the raids by ICE, by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Y es que nuestra comunidad no está segura ni en su casa, ni en la escuela.
Our communities are not safe at home or at school.
Los centros de detención están lucrando con el sufrimiento de nuestra comunidad.
The detention centers are making money with the happiness of our community.
Y hacen permisible que inmigrantes y refugiadas de todas edades e identidades sean enjaulados.
And they allow immigrants of all ages to be chained up and locked up.
Pero estamos cansados.
For we are tired.
Sabemos que nuestra lucha va más allá de un seguro social o de un estatus legal.
We know that our struggle goes beyond a social security number or any kind of legal status.
Y sobre todo que nuestra lucha está conectada a otras luchas.
And above all, that our struggle is connected to other struggles.
Porque tenemos diferentes identidades.
Because we have different identities.
Y porque la raíz de nuestros problemas son los mismos.
And because the root of our problems are the same.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I want to say thank you to the conference and to Nayely and Shaena and to Craig. The one thing I think I want everybody to know, it's actually two things as we start this conversation. Obviously, LGBT lives are profoundly vulnerable and threatened by criminal legal systems. And we have been for centuries, for decades. Centuries might be exaggerated, decades. Our lives have been criminalized, over-policed, and regulated by the state in a wide range of ways. And the people who bear the brunt of that today continue to be people of color, trans people especially. And what I think it's really important for everybody to bring into the room is that today there is an incredible movement all over the country led by grassroots activists, but also that has coalesced at the national level to do something about the over-policing, mass incarceration, and over-criminalization. It is part of a larger movement, but it is also a very queer movement. And I think it's really the hidden story of the work that people in this room are doing and across the country are doing. And I'm going to talk more about that.
Excellent, thank you all so much. So if each of you could please share a story from your work that helps the audience know what's at stake. What's at stake for the people that you work with? Urvashi, would you begin, please?
I started doing criminal justice work in the late 70s and early 80s as a law student and activist and as a worker in the National Prison Project at the ACLU. And one of the first prisons I visited was Mecklenburg Correctional Center, way back then in Virginia. And it's a maximum security facility. We were doing an investigation of reports of brutality at the time. I was 23 years old, probably. 23, 24. Really my first job out of law school. And we were just interviewing individuals who had written letters to us to complain about guard brutality and conditions, to try to figure out if there was enough for a lawsuit. And one of the people who walked into the room was a young man who was maybe 20 years old at the time, just 3 or 4 years younger than me. And I will never forget him because he said to me, he was incarcerated in Virginia. This is 1983, 84. He was incarcerated for 10 years in a max prison for violation of the Virginia sodomy law. And he had been in a consensual relationship as a 19-year-old with a 17-year-old, and the younger man's mom found a journal, and proceedings were initiated. The guy was serving 10 years. It was a revelation to me because I had experienced sodomy laws as these things on the books, and here was somebody who was living it. Now fast forward to today. I'm working at the national level as an organizer with this amazing criminal justice coalition, the LGBT HIV Federal Criminal Justice Policy Working Group. A cumbersome title, Shane's part of it, but it's a coalition of over 45 organizations, local, state, national, working together to try to change policy at the federal agency level. Justice Department, Bureau of Prisons, any agency that we think has a stake in this. One of the members of that coalition today is a young man who was formerly incarcerated, who spent 9 years in prison for consensual sex with an individual, with a young man. And as a result of laws that have been passed in the last decade or two, he is a registered sex offender. He's out after serving 9 years, but he has to register where he lives. He cannot live within 2,000 feet of a school or university. He has to register where he works. He can never get off the registry for his entire life. There is no judicial review. There is no due process. He has already served his time, and he is serving additional time, and he runs the risk of being recommitted. And just last week, our Congress passed and the President signed an international version of this registry law, which now authorizes the State Department to create a special stamp that will go on the passport of people like this individual who sits in this coalition. So that, and to notify foreign countries if they travel, if somebody is traveling, that a sex offender is coming. Now, we all care about abuse. We are a movement that knows it and care about it. But these policies and the criminalization and the processes we use in the criminal legal system to take care of virtually any problem, they are not working, they are wrong, and they are damaging. So what moves me in this work is to meet people, to meet individuals like this, to know that people with HIV are being criminalized across this country in 32 states, to know that all sorts of people end up on these registries and are caught up in the juvenile system, in the immigration detention system, in jails, women, men, trans people, and so many are experiencing profound injustice.
Thank you. Sheena?
So I want to tell a story that is all too familiar. It's not just one specific person that has been affected by this. It's actually something that I see, unfortunately, very often. So just to give a little bit of background, so Bert was gracious enough to tell about my experience in the juvenile justice system. I was investigating conditions of confinement in the juvenile prisons and detention centers in Louisiana. That's a lot of facilities, and I had to go to each one of them. So I saw countless youth just sitting behind bars, some of them sitting there without due process, some of them sitting there without an active attorney. And the law is, if you are adjudicated as a juvenile, so basically adjudication is if you're quote unquote sentenced as a juvenile, whoever is your attorney at that sentencing point has to be your attorney throughout your stay in detention or prison as a juvenile to your 21st birthday. Well, I saw an overwhelming number of youth sitting in detention centers and prisons that did not have an active attorney representing them. So there was no one there to advocate for them based on any kind of conditions that were affecting them in the juvenile detention center or the prisons. So youth were being abused, mistreated, in wrong programming, and nobody really knew about it. And so while I started, this actually prompted me to do the advocacy piece. So while I saw that, I was prompted to starting to work with different public defenders' offices across the state to try to get some representation into some of these facilities, which then turned into an enormous number of grievances being written on behalf of these youth based on the abuse that was going on in these facilities. An overwhelming number of youth that were affected by the abuse in these facilities were queer and trans youth of color. They were basically just left there to rot until the end of their sentence. And what I noticed was, number one, the sentencing was disproportionate. Another thing that I noticed was the programming in which these youth were assigned to was not competent, meaning that we had youth who were trans girls being sent to programming called Thinking for a Change, which is basically a hyper-masculine type program that teaches, quote-unquote, boys to be men. If you didn't, so the rule is if you don't complete that programming, then your sentence is lengthened. And so we had a lot of children sitting in prison and in detention centers because their programming did not fit their needs. Another thing that I noticed while doing investigations in conditions of confinement and also juvenile criminal investigations is that judges were overwhelmingly incompetent with dealing with queer and trans youth. They would send youth to alternatives like boot camp and things of that nature, which further criminalized them because in boot camp you have to wear a uniform. And if you don't wear the right uniform, you're punished. So if you're trans, you're not actually given a uniform that matches your gender identity or expression. If you're gender non-conforming, you're forced to wear the uniform that is based on your birth sex, which is unsafe in itself. And so a lot of these things are pushing our youth down further into the criminal justice system. So our judges also deal with the Department of Children and Family Services. A lot of times our youth are incarcerated just because they don't have anywhere else to go. And so the Department of Children and Family Services in Louisiana actually does not recognize transgender youth based on their gender identity. So if a youth is sent to a placement in the Department of Children and Family Services, they are forced to dress according to their birth sex and not according to their gender identity or expression. That is very harmful. In a lot of cases, I've seen where youth have, quote-unquote, rebelled against the wishes of the Department of Children and Family Services and have started wearing clothing that matches their gender identity and expression, but have gotten in trouble by their foster parents. A case in particular, there was a youth that is a trans girl. She dressed as a girl and wanted to be called a girl, and it caused actually a fight within that home. This youth's jaw was broken. They were severely abused, but they were sent to prison because they fought back. This is a particularly hard story to tell just because I was there from beginning to end. and everything, sorry. But one point that I do want to make about this particular case is that the judge actually disregarded the fact that this youth is trans, refused to call her by her name, the name she wants to be called, consistently misgendered her, consistently told her that she was acting out, and that she really wasn't trans, it was just a phase. The prosecutor joined in and co-signed the judge and said that this youth was a nuisance because they wanted to be treated as a girl instead of a boy. And so this kind of, well, it absolutely influenced their sentencing. The foster parent would not take them back into the household, so she was sentenced to detention until further notice. There are several youth that go through this particular instance and these situations, and truth be told, the Department of Children and Family Services is not being held accountable for their lack of service for queer and transgender youth. If anything, the Department of Children and Family Services further harms queer and transgender youth based on these poor practices and policies. There are things that are written into policy that says that the Department of Children and Family Services will not reimburse for clothing that is not commensurate with gender identity. Not commensurate with their birth sex. I know this because I personally bought clothes for youth who are trans, and I was told that they could wear the clothes if they wanted to, but I would not be reimbursed. And the rule is you're supposed to be reimbursed for whatever services or items you provide to a child that's in a precarious state. So that is one kind of every man, every woman story that we deal with queer and trans youth in the juvenile justice system. And I can even go as far as to say the SINC attorneys, child in need of care attorneys who work for the Department of Children and Family Services further exacerbate these issues because they do not care for the youth that they're representing in the culturally competent manner. So our youth are being failed at every aspect of the juvenile criminal justice system in Louisiana. They're very much so being harmed. Our courts are actually doing reparative therapy. Even though they're not calling it that, that's what it is. And that's something that we absolutely have to end in Louisiana.
Yes. Thank you, Sheena.
Bueno, hay muchas historias, pero elijo resaltar una, la historia de Wilding, que es un joven que está en proceso de deportación y que podría ser deportado este domingo.
Well, there are many stories to share, but I have chosen to share this particular story of Wilvin. He is a male who is in the process of being deported.
Wilding es un joven de Durham, Carolina del Norte.
Wilding is a young boy from Durham, North Carolina.
Wilding, el 28 de enero, teniendo su rutina normal, salió de su departamento a prender el carro para calentarlo.
Wilding was going out on January the 28th on his daily routine. He got out of the house and turned his car on.
Era un poco antes de las 7 de la mañana.
It was a little bit before 7 in the morning.
Cuando salió al estacionamiento del complejo de apartamentos,
When he went out to the building complex,
agentes de inmigración lo estaban esperando.
ICE agents were out there to get him.
Lo tiraron al piso, lo esposaron y se lo llevaron.
They threw him on the floor, they handcuffed him, and they took him.
El padre de Wilding, Héctor, presenció todo,
Wilding's father, Hector, was there to see everything,
pero no pudo hacer nada.
but he could not do anything.
Wilding es uno de los refugiados centroamericanos que entró a Estados Unidos en el 2014.
Wilding is one of the Central American refugees who entered the U.S. in 2014.
En el 2014 sucedieron muchas cosas,
In 2014, many things happened,
incluyendo que vinieron miles de refugiados centroamericanos huyendo de la violencia y buscando refugio en este país.
including thousands of Central American refugees who entered the U.S. seeking refugee.
Muchos de estos refugiados fueron puestos en centros de detención.
Many of these refugees were detained and put into detention centers,
incluyendo madres y niños de una edad tan corta como 3 meses.
including mothers and babies and children, babies including 3 months old.
Muchas de estas personas fueron puestas en deportación,
Many of these people were put into deportation.
muchas se quedaron por mucho tiempo en los centros de detención
Many stayed for a very long time in detention centers.
y otras personas como Wilding que trataron de poner un caso de asilo pudieron llegar a un lugar en el país.
And many like Wilding who tried to get an asylum case and to try to stay in the country.
También en el 2014 el presidente Obama anunció un programa nuevo de acción diferida para ciertos padres de niños ciudadanos o residentes legales.
Also in 2014, President Obama tried to put a deferred action for parents of U.S. citizens, and they were trying to save the country.
Lo que hace esto es que previene o hubiese prevenido que las personas fueran puestas en proceso de deportación.
This would have prevented for people to be put into deportation process.
Y también se anunció una expansión al programa de acción diferida para los jóvenes llegados a la infancia.
And there was also an expansion for those deferred actions for the youth who were here as students from a very young age.
Pero como sabemos, estas políticas ahorita están detenidas en la Corte.
But as we know, all of these projects are in pause at the court.
Mas, sin embargo, nunca nos da nada sin quitarnos algo.
However, they never give us anything without taking something away.
También en el 2014 se anunciaron nuevas acciones, nuevas prioridades de deportación.
Also in 2014, they announced new actions, new ways of deporting.
Wilding se convirtió en una prioridad de deportación.
Wilding was made a priority for deportation.
Comenzando en el 2015, bueno, no comenzando, a finales del 2015 escuchamos que iban a comenzar una serie de redadas enfocándose en las prioridades que se habían desarrollado en el 2014.
At the end of 2015, we heard these many actions for raids that were already initiated in 2014.
Y creo que la palabra clave es se intensificaron.
And I think the key word would be these intensified.
Porque las deportaciones y las redadas siempre han existido.
Because raids and deportations have always existed.
A principios de este año, del 2016,
At the beginning of this year, 2016,
comenzamos a escuchar de casos en Georgia, en Carolina del Norte,
we began to hear about these cases in Georgia and North Carolina,
donde inmigración estaba irrumpiendo en los hogares a las 4 de la mañana.
where ICE was going into the houses at 4 in the morning.
Estaban entrando con mentiras,
They were going in with lies,
con intimidación,
intimidation,
esperando a las personas en los estacionamientos,
waiting for people at the parking lots,
deteniendo a estudiantes a punto de abordar el autobús escolar,
detaining students at the verge of going on the bus.
usaron y siguen usando tácticas deplorables.
They are using and keep using opposing tactics.
Desafortunadamente, Wilding es una de las muchas víctimas.
Unfortunately, William is one of the many victims.
Y es importante recalcar que muchos de estos casos no han salido públicamente.
And it's very important to emphasize that many of these cases have not been out publicly.
Hay mucho miedo en la comunidad.
There is much fear among the community.
Hay familias que han tenido que mudarse porque saben que inmigración los está acechando.
There are families who have had to move away because they know that ICE is looking out for them.
Pero sabemos que como comunidad tenemos que luchar contra la maquinaria de deportaciones.
But as a community, we know we have to fight against this deportation machinery.
Seguiremos exigiendo un alto a las deportaciones,
We will still demand a stop to deportations,
un alto a las redadas,
a stop the raids,
y seguiremos pidiendo rendición de cuentas al presidente Obama y a cualquier político que se meta con nuestra comunidad.
and we will keep asking for President Obama and any other politician who is going to be getting into our community. Thanks.
Those are some hard stories to hear, which tells me that they are exactly the stories that we need to be hearing. But that's not everything, right? Would you each please share with us briefly, what is it that's working? What is it that gives you hope, whether it's in the community or at the local, state, or federal level? What gives you hope? Nayely?
Para mí es el liderazgo de la comunidad directamente afectada,
For me, it's the leadership shown by the communities that are directly affected.
en mi organización, en SEIRN,
In my organization, in SEIRN,
creemos que el cambio viene cuando las personas directamente afectadas están al frente de la lucha.
we believe that change is brought about when the people who are directly affected take the leadership position in the fight.
Cuando personas indocumentadas, personas directamente afectadas, se enfrentan cara a cara con el poder, eso es muy chingón.
When the people who are directly affected, when undocumented people go face to face with the power, that's fucking awesome.
La resiliencia y la resistencia de nuestra gente es poderoso.
The resilience and the power to resist from our people is powerful.
Y es increíble cuando nuestras comunidades entran a lugares, por ejemplo,
And it's incredible when our communities go into places, for instance,
la Asamblea General de Carolina del Norte,
the General Assembly in North Carolina,
en lugares donde no son recibidos.
places where they are not well received,
Y nuestra comunidad se presenta como indocumentados, como indocumentadas.
and our community introduces itself as undocumented people.
Sabemos que el cambio nunca va a venir de los políticos,
We know that change will never come from politicians.
va a venir de nuestra gente.
It will come from our people.
Y eso está creciendo cada vez más.
And this is growing each and every time.
Finalmente, espacios como este me animan y me dan esperanza.
And finally, spaces like this make me excited and give me hope.
Nuevamente, tenemos diferentes identidades y no podemos segmentar nuestras luchas.
Again, we have different identities and we cannot segment our struggles.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Urvashi, what gives you hope?
Organizing. And exactly what Nayely said, the intersectional nature of the organizing right now, the fact that it's not isolated, so that the immigrant rights and justice movement is fighting for the rights of trans women in detention and successfully blocked the opening of this trans prison in Atlanta. That was a joint struggle. Or that the movement for Black Lives has been, since the Ferguson nightmare, but even before, has been organizing effectively, and just last week defeated 2 DAs in 2 votes in Illinois and Ohio. And you see the critical resistance work, a movement that perhaps some of you are involved in, organizations working to block jail construction and the expansion of prison. And in a weird way, what gives me hope is also this moment of bipartisan criminal justice reform that you're seeing in states across the South. Because, you know, people from the right and the left are coming together, very different motivations. Some people motivated just by cost cutting. But the upshot of it is that, you know, in Texas, they've closed 3 prisons and several juvenile facilities. I'm not saying Texas is a model by any stretch of the imagination, but across the South, there is a momentum and a possibility for decarceration, for expansion of reentry and alternatives to incarceration, for redeploying funds from construction to community-based programs. And that's something that organizers of all kinds should take advantage of. And I just want to say the other thing that really gives me hope at the national level is this working group that has come into being. And I did a shameless plug for a document that if y'all want to learn more about some of the stuff that concretely people are trying to do at the national level, I urge you to look at a roadmap for change. It's called a roadmap for change. It's available online. Federal policy recommendations for addressing the criminalization of LGBT people and people living with HIV. It was a document created through the input of hundreds of people. 50 people who came together at a convening, another 75 people who took the time to comment and add, and it's a first sort of effort to try to articulate what would be a policy organizing agenda for us at the national level, and what's going on that's driving the criminalization of LGBT people and people living with HIV. So all these things give me a lot of hope. There is a tremendous amount of organizing going on.
Great, thank you. We will. That is an amazing document, and we will get the link to that up on the plenary page of the conference website. Sheena, what gives you hope?
Oh man, y'all give me hope. Just the fact that y'all are convening here and willing to learn and willing to go out and do some work, that gives me a whole lot of hope. Another thing that gives me hope is basically where Urvashi and Nayely said. I mean, just the fact that the folks who are directly affected themselves are standing up and speaking truth and not giving a damn. That gives me hope. Another thing that gives me hope is when I go into these detention centers and I see these youth in change and they're still smiling, they're still ready to fight. That gives me a lot of hope. The fact that even though we had one of the most oppressive governors in Louisiana, we were still able to get legislation passed that gave some kind of relief to the poor conditions of confinement for queer and trans youth specifically. And I could go on and on. We're now having conversations with judges who were absolutely horrible in the past, who have somehow seen the light and are wanting to do better. Having conversations with juvenile prison directors who are emailing me, asking me for trainings and saying that, hey, we have to do something better. That gives me hope. The youth at BreakOUT, can I just give a shameless plug? Every day, even though sometimes we might not see eye to eye, they give me hope. They definitely give me hope because they're willing to be on the front lines and standing and fighting, not just for themselves, but for everybody who is affected. So I get hope from a lot of different places. It's not just a deficit story for me. I need hope just to keep me running. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, panel. Now it's your turn. What I would like to do is to take 2 or 3 minutes. If you could turn to the person next to you and just introduce yourself, share your name, your pronouns, and where you're from. And if you could just share with them one thing that is on your mind or in your heart after listening to our panel speak. So if you would take just 3 minutes, make sure both of you get a chance to speak, and do that right now. you could please bring your attention back to the stage.
Clap if you can hear my voice. Clap if you can hear my voice. Clap if you can hear my voice. Thank you.
So our sound system, is this on? Have we got it back? No. Okay. Our sound system seems to have just gotten turned off. While we get that figured out, it's now your turn. We've got a little bit less than half an hour and a few hundred of you, so there should be time for everybody, maybe not. We would like to invite your questions and your comments. We have two folks, Felicia and Mandy, are going to be coming around with microphones that may or may not work.
Can you hear me now? No.
Yeah, it's on. We don't have any of them on right now. So those of you who can shout, please go first. What we would like to invite you to do is, of course, you can ask a question of our panel, and feel free to direct it to one particular member of the panel if